A last act of defiance, angry migrants set fire to parts of the jungle migrant camp as work to demolish it continues. Thick black smoke rises over the camp as some of the last remaining migrants say they will not be moved. We'll be getting the latest from Calais. Also this lunchtime, a wake-up call for Vodafone as it's fined £4.6 million for charging some pay-as-you-go customers for nothing. 2 UKIP MEPs have been reported to French police over their altercation at the European Parliament earlier this month. Giving mums and dads the skills to become super parents can dramatically improve their child's autism, according to new research. All rise, the last time the judges appear together for the final of Bake Off before the show leaves the BBC.
Here in the south, the woman who was allowed out of hospital and took an overdose, now her family want answers. And why air pollution in Oxfordshire is likely to kill more people than a road accident.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. In what appears to be a last act of defiance, angry migrants have been starting fires in the migrant camp in Calais known as the Jungle. A large number of makeshift buildings and shelters are reported to have been destroyed. As more migrants joined queues today for buses to take them out of the camp, some of the last remaining occupants say they are still determined to get to Britain. Our correspondent Simon Jones is there. Simon.
Well, people are still not being allowed into the jungle because the situation is considered to be so dangerous. Up there you can see the police maintaining a cordon. This all started during the night when shops and restaurants were set on fire on the main entrance road into the jungle. It's continued throughout the day. Now you can currently still see smoke rising from the jungle as the fire service struggle to put them out. It's threatening to get dangerously out of control. This is not how the demolition of the jungle was planned. Flames quickly spreading between the makeshift shelters. The end in the most dramatic way. Although it was largely the shops and restaurants that had been declared illegal by the government that were set on fire last night, the flames also spread to this shelter where 17 people were sleeping. They were woken in the early hours and had a lucky escape from their beds. How many people were sleeping here?
17 people. Sleeping here.
Were you scared?
Yes.
Throughout the morning, a large part of the jungle has gone up in flames. This is just the latest fire to begin. We're keeping a safe distance away, but real concern of how much of the jungle is being burnt down. It wasn't much, but some people called it their home. What are you going to do now?
I don't know, but we definitely don't have a place to live, so because it's all been burned, so we can stick around and go somewhere today. So,
will you go on the buses?
Yeah.
Calais Police Commissioner insists the situation is under control. You think activists were responsible?
That's the migrant who tell me that. I have no conclusion about that, but they have a special investigation about that. They have a special team who try to find the person who put the fire.
The fires have acted as a further incentive for people to leave, but there's concern not all the children who are to remain in Calais in a secure shelter have been accounted for, and hundreds of adults may have disappeared, choosing to try to remain in the area rather than being bussed out. Those who have gone to reception centres organised by the government, like this one in Normandy, are discovering life away from the jungle is very different.
This is a house. We sleep in the jungle, in the tent. So here is more good because there is so cool. Here eaters, food, nice food, also kitchen, everything is here fine.
As the jungle burns, this really is the end for the camp that proved so controversial. Well, there is some concern that the children who are being housed in a shipping container on the other side of the jungle are still there as the fires are burning, but we're told by the authorities that they will be safe. Now, the latest figures we have so far are 4,000 migrants have been given different shelter away from the jungle, 3,000 adults taken away on buses. But I think today's events have made what can be a chaotic situation even more difficult.
Simon Jones in Calais, thank you. It's the largest fine ever imposed on a telecoms company, the £4.6 million slapped on Vodafone for serious breaches of consumer protection rules. One investigation found that the company charged pay-as-you-go customers for topping up their credit and then failed to register it. Ofcom says customers were literally paying for nothing. It also found the company had broken the rules on handling customer complaints. Vodafone offered its profound apologies and said it was determined to put everything right. Our technology correspondent Rory Catherine-Jones reports.
You have the power to do more in more places.
Yes! It's the world's second largest mobile operator and makes big claims about what it can do for its customers. But now Vodafone stands accused of serious and sustained failings in its dealings with them. That's led to the biggest fine the regulator has imposed on a telecoms firm.
We want to send a clear message, not just to Vodafone, but right across the communications industry, that they need to up their game on customer service quality, and they need to get on and deliver that now.
At the heart of the complaint was the fact that a new billing system meant some pay-as-you-go users were topping up, but their accounts weren't being credited.
This stems from the fact that Vodafone was trying to migrate those customers from its old legacy billing systems. It had something like 7 of those, and it was trying to bring them into a sort of new modern platform that should have meant better things for consumers. But we know that these things are often difficult and complex to implement, and Vodafone have tripped up.
More than 10,000 pay-as-you-go customers lost a total of £150,000 over a period of 17 months, trying and failing to top up. But it went further than that. It was the way Vodafone handled the customer complaints that led to Ofcom imposing such a big fine. Ofcom's figures show Vodafone has been far and away the worst performing mobile firm in terms of customer complaints. At one stage, it had 3 times the industry average. Today, one customer told us an issue with a faulty phone went on far too long.
I wasn't able to find anybody who was able to actually make that call and say, you know, we did something wrong. Even the complaints line told me they couldn't help me.
In a statement, Vodafone said, "We deeply regret these system and process failures. We are completely focused on serving our customers. It is clear from Ofcom's findings that we did not do that often enough or well enough on a number of occasions. We offer our profound apologies to anyone affected by these errors."
Try our even bigger and better network today with our network satisfaction guarantee.
For a company of Vodafone's scale, a £4.6 million fine isn't significant. What will hurt in a very competitive mobile market is the further damage to its reputation. Rory Catherine-Jones, BBC News.
UKIP MEPs Stephen Woolfe and Mike Hookham have been reported to French police over their altercation at the European Parliament earlier this month. The incident left Mr Woolfe needing urgent hospital treatment. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth is inside the EU Parliament building in Strasbourg. So what happens next?
Well, it's been 3 weeks since this incident took place, and exactly what occurred between these two men is still very much the subject of discussion. We know there was a meeting of UKIP MEPs, we know it became heated, and we know 2 of them, Stephen Woolfe and Mike Hookham, went to an ante-room. Now there, Mr Woolfe says Mike Hookham landed a blow. Mike Hookham has consistently denied hitting, punching or pushing Mr Woolfe, who later collapsed and was taken to hospital. Now the European Parliament did investigate this incident, and this morning its President, Martin Schulz, said because the accounts of these 2 men substantially diverged and there was no witnesses, that he had referred this to French prosecutors. But he later added there was clear suspicion that Mr Woolfe was subject of an act of violence. Now that caused some anger among some UKIP MEPs. Mike Hookham himself said that was a defamatory statement. He threatened legal action. Nigel Farage said there was absolutely no evidence anyone was punched and criticised Martin Schulz, the European Parliament President, for involving the police. This incident laid bare the inner turmoil within UKIP, and it's not resolved yet. The party is expected to publish its own report into what exactly happened tomorrow.
Alex, thank you very much. Alex Forsyth there in Strasbourg. NATO has got Spain in its sights for reportedly preparing to allow Russian warships to refuel on their way to support the bombing campaign against the Syrian city of Aleppo. The warships are thought to be docking at a Spanish port in North Africa at some point today. Well, our diplomatic correspondent Jonathan Marcus is in Brussels, where NATO defence ministers, including Spain's and the UK's, are currently meeting. And Jonathan, are Spain in stormy waters over this?
Well, they are a little in stormy waters. I think many NATO ministers here are rather alarmed and concerned about this. I spoke to Britain's Defence Secretary, Mr Fallon, earlier today. He said he was frankly very concerned that any NATO member would seek to give assistance to a Russian flotilla that might well be on its way to bomb Syrian civilians, as he put it. So there is great concern. For its part, the government in Madrid is saying that lots of Russian warships call there. They look at each visit on a case-by-case basis, and they're now reviewing this current application to put in. One should say it's probably only the tankers that will put in, not the actual warships themselves, but they're looking at that based on what they're being told from Moscow, and of course also hearing the views of their allies.
Jonathan Marcus, thank you very much. Children with severe autism are often unable to communicate with their parents. But if mums and dads are taught so-called super parenting skills, their child's social skills can dramatically improve. In a long-term study, parents watched films of themselves playing with their child while a therapist offered communication tips. Experts said the results, published in The Lancet, were hugely cheering. Our education correspondent Robert Piggott reports.
Oh, that's off a pirate ship, isn't it?
Aaron Sawyer-Koppus loves football, drums and Lego and is among the 1% of children with autism. As a 4-year-old, he was withdrawn and unresponsive. But as part of the study, researchers spent a year teaching his mother, Tracy, how to spot his fleeting, often subtle efforts to communicate. She watched video of their encounters and learned how to transform Aaron's behaviour.
It became where Aaron was actually leading the play and I was copying off him, and then he would look at me to see if I was doing what he was doing. Very little facial gestures, but it's very subtle, the changes. And it was lovely just to see that he could actually play with toys rather than just banging them together. He did what they were supposed to do.
The study included 152 children. Among those whose parents were not trained, the number classified as severely autistic increased, as usually happens, from half initially to almost 2/3 6 years later. But among the children whose parents were trained, the number who were severely autistic decreased from 55% to start with to 46%.
That's highly significant for us because it suggests that the changes we've been able to make and the parents have been able to make in the family dynamic and then the interaction have sustained themselves through all that period. That's really good news for us and suggests that the children's development is on a slightly different track than what it would have been before.
There were improvements in core elements of autism, such as social communication and repetitive behaviours, which are often hard to change. But many parents struggle to get the sort of early diagnosis and help offered to Aaron. Campaigners blame a lack of awareness among health professionals and a shortage of specialist workers.
Diagnostic services are a little bit overwhelmed at the moment, to be honest, and that we know that waiting times are very long. And we also know that the NHS isn't being measured on how well it's doing in this area, and so it's not always an area that is prioritised as much as it needs to be.
The training of super parents trained in communication is not a cure for autism, but experts say the sustained benefit to children is remarkable and highly encouraging. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
Official figures show that earnings have risen fastest among the lowest paid because of the introduction of the new national living wage. The Office for National Statistics said the lowest paid workers on average received an increase of more than 6% between April last year and the same month this year. The gender pay gap shrunk only slightly. Men on average still earn 9.4% more than women. The huge military offensive to retake Mosul from so-called Islamic State is continuing. Iraqi special forces have evacuated more than 1,000 civilians from villages near the front line around the city, raising fears of a humanitarian crisis once the battle for Mosul itself starts. Our correspondent Shaima Khalil has just sent this report from Erbil.
Inching towards the so-called Islamic State's stronghold. The counter-terrorism service, the Iraqi army's elite unit, are nearly 3 miles away from Mosul. Like many villages on the way to Iraq's second city, this one has been battered by the fighting. The forces are now in the area, but not without IS resistance. The militants are fighting back, not just in Mosul and the areas around it. They've taken the battle away from the front line in cities across Iraq. IS are said to be fighting in the oil-rich city of Kirkuk still. The militants launched a major attack there last Friday. Nearly 2,000 Peshmerga forces are reported to have been pulled out of the front line near Mosul and into Kirkuk to contain the situation. The violence is ongoing, but the authorities say they're in control.
They thought they could take Kirkuk, but their thoughts mean nothing. As long as we stand, we will put our chests in front of their bullets, and we will become shields to protect Kirkuk with all its nationalities.
As the battle for Mosul continues, so will the fierce backlash by the militants. We're also starting to get a picture of what people who are living in areas under IS control have been going through in the past 2 years. The UN says it has received reports of atrocities committed by the so-called Islamic State, including shooting civilians and dumping their bodies in a river just to spread terror. Residents in areas around Mosul have been waiting for the forces so that they can flee to safety. This man speaks of life under IS.
There were no cigarettes, no mobile phones, no satellites, and we had to wear long trousers and a beard. They deprived us of everything. Life was terrible. Only praying, and that's all. Getting up, praying, and that's it.
Aid agencies have warned of a humanitarian crisis with hundreds of thousands expected to flee Mosul. This is where many refugees have been living since the fall of the city in 2014. The so-called Islamic State is now fighting back on several fronts, using every tactic they know to repel the advance. Despite the forces getting closer to their stronghold, it's still a long way before Mosul is cleared. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Erbil, northern Iraq.
It's just after 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. Parts of the jungle migrant camp are set on fire as work to demolish it continues. Some of the last remaining migrants say they will not be moved. Still to come, a cash boost for grassroots football as their new Parklife scheme gets £200 million.
And coming up here on South Today with me at 1:30, she said she was being sexually harassed on her ward. So why did it take one hospital 48 hours to respond to Katie Hall's allegations? And the claims that pollution in one county is more likely to kill someone than a road accident. Someone who commits a crime between the ages of 18 and 25 should not be treated as an adult by the criminal justice system because their brains are still developing. That's according to an influential group of MPs. The Justice Committee says it's true that that age group, which represents 10% of the population, commits more than a third of all crimes, but says they have the greatest potential to stop because their brains are still maturing. Our legal correspondent Clive Coleman reports.
Young people who commit crimes typically stop in their mid-20s. So perhaps not surprisingly, today's report adopts research which shows that their brains are still developing up to the age of 25.
That includes things like impulse control, being aware of the consequences of your actions, thinking ahead, not being led on by peers. All of those things neurologically aren't in place in the brain until at least the mid-20s for males.
The report finds that dealing effectively with young adult offenders between 18 and 25 while the brain's still developing is crucial for them to successfully transition to a crime-free adulthood. And that's just not happening at the moment.
The Justice Committee doesn't want young adult offenders to be placed in adult prisons like this. So it's proposing to raise the age for those in young offender institutions from 20 to 25 as part of a drive to try and stop reoffending.
Today's report also recommends trialling specialist courts for the 18 to 25-year-old group, universal screening by prisons and probation services for mental health needs, and extending statutory support provided by criminal justice agencies for the under-18s to those aged up to 25. But not everyone working with young adult offenders agrees.
To suggest that anyone of the age of 25 isn't an adult and isn't capable of making choices in their lives, for me is totally wrong. And what I actually believe is we're forgetting really about the victims of crime. They're the ones that are important in all this.
But the authors of the report see real benefits of a step change in policy for young adult offenders.
it's better in terms of outcomes for the public, because it's most likely to reduce reoffending. This, after all, is the group with the worst reoffending rates. 75% reoffend within 2 years of release. So it's good from that point of view if we want to drive down crime.
Today's proposals represent a radical shift in thinking, but the government points to a fall in young adults in prison and says it's already committed to addressing the challenges they present. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
Hundreds of thousands of people in the UK live in areas with excessive air pollution, but measuring exactly how much is more complicated than it seems. British scientists have now taken to the skies in a specially built plane to help them analyse pollutants in the air and find out what causes them. Our science reporter Victoria Gill joined the team on their first test flight.
At ground level, pollution from busy streets and industry can damage our health. But for a really accurate measure of what's in the air we breathe, scientists have to take to the sky. That's why this specially adapted aircraft is heading into polluted air above our cities to measure exactly what's in it.
The plane's heading for a plume of pollution that's being carried on the winds from Liverpool and Manchester. It'll slice through that plume several times, sucking in the air through these tubes so that this airborne laboratory can analyse it.
The instruments on board detect spikes in gases like nitrogen dioxide. They also pick up the small particles in air that can damage our lungs. This is a test flight, but it's the first step in a national-scale project to calculate what emissions each UK city is producing.
We want to try and understand how we can improve the air quality. We need to know how much of these things are being emitted, where they're being emitted from, which sources, be that car exhaust or industry. And doing this type of flying is one of the best ways of doing that.
Experts also say that the UK could struggle to meet air pollution targets it's set for the next 5 years. Measuring what's being emitted and from where is just a first step to tackling that problem back on the ground. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
The UK's water companies are campaigning for tough measures to try to stop people flushing wet wipes into the sewage system. They want a ban on manufacturers labelling wet wipes as flushable. Jane McCubbin has been investigating.
Britain loves wet wipes. Toilets hate them. Andrew knows only too well. Here in Barry, to unblock yet another blockage, he'll do about 5 a day.
Yep, there is something on the end of this.
Ugh. Blockages are a £7 million a year problem in Wales. He says there's one prime culprit.
Wet wipes.
So just how flushable is flushable? Let's do a little test. This is loo roll. In a few minutes, it's pretty much disintegrated.
Not so the flushable wet wipes, which the Trade Association itself tells me can take up to 3 hours to fully disintegrate, and that is if they follow the voluntary code. If they don't, it could take far longer. You've tested all the big brands here. What do you make of that 3-hour claim? Do they?
No, most of them don't break down in 3 hours. In fact, some we've tested for 3 days or even 3 weeks, and they still do not break down.
And that is a problem for people like Andrew off on another call in South Wales, because a domestic blockage above ground can look like this below ground. A lot can stick to a wet wipe if they don't break down quickly. The water companies say action must be taken.
If you have a wipe that would pass the UK guidelines, come and get it tested at WRC or show us the results of your own testing.
Nobody has.
Nobody has.
They say your flushables aren't flushable.
We know that they are. The wipes industry has made a huge amount of investment into making flushable wipes products as weak as possible for when they enter the water networks. The biggest problem are people putting things down the toilet that should never be there in the first place.
Work is underway on a new international standard, agreed by both manufacturers and the water industry, but that will still only be voluntary. As wet wipe demand continues to grow, so too will the problem of blockages. Jane McCubbin, BBC News.
The interim England football manager Gareth Southgate has been attending to duties off the pitch as well as on it. He's launched the FA's grassroots football programme, which aims to create special centres for the sport in communities across England. 2 games into his 4-match managerial stint, and Southgate has so far secured a win and a draw. John Maguire has been to meet him.
It's step 5 and 6.
He has a job that should be a jewel in the crown of British sport, but so often ends as a poisoned chalice.
I'm trying to hide behind that.
Today, though, a positive aspect of being England manager, as Gareth Southgate is on his first official visit as the incumbent to look around a brand new football centre. It's called a Park Life Football Hub. This one in Sheffield is the first of its kind. The FA plans to build them in 30 cities across England over the next 5 years, and it believes there's a real demand.
I've been involved with grassroots teams myself, and I know how difficult it is to find pitches to play on. If you're on grass pitches, you can only use them a couple of hours a week, and here we can play for 10, 12 hours a day. So the impact that will have on young players and the quality of football that they're able to play as well is huge.
The football associations combining with the government, local authorities and the professional game to create the centres. Money made from teams renting the pitches will be ploughed back into local football. The all-weather artificial surface can be played on by young and old, the talented and just enthusiasts.
Any ability level, male, female, disability. If we get a star from it, then brilliant, but it's very much around participation. Get as many people playing the game as regularly as possible.
As for the man at the top, for the time being at least, he's halfway through an emergency 4-match tenure.
Enjoying being England manager? I've enjoyed the last couple of weeks. It was obviously an incredible challenge, and there was a lot to take in a very short period of time. But yeah, no, I enjoyed the 2 weeks, and now we're just thinking about how we prepare for the next couple of matches. Yeah.
Do you want the job long term?
I've not really had time. I think it's something that you have to think about very seriously, and I haven't had time to do that. My head's immersed in getting it right for the next 5 weeks for the team, and for everybody that wants the team to do so well. So I think if I'm not fully focused on that, then that's not what I've been asked to do. I wanted to thank you really as well for your support for the local community, because
he may be giving little away about his ambitions, but does give away tickets for England's World Cup qualifier against Scotland next month to 4 grassroots heroes as a thank you for their contribution to the sport.
We've got seats in the Royal Box for the match. Now you'll have to decide whether that's a good prize or not. You can tell me after 90 minutes whether that's been.
And in that, Gareth Southgate tells us all we need to know. 90 minutes in the cauldron of Wembley against a Scotland that will be playing not just with pride and passion, but ultimately for points and a place at the next World Cup. A match that could lead to his coronation or his condemnation. John Maguire, BBC News, Sheffield.
Now, there won't be a dry eye in the house or the tent. There's unlikely to be any soggy bottoms. It's the final tonight of the Great British Bake Off, and it will quite literally be a showstopper for the BBC, as it's the last time Mary Berry and Mel and Sue appear in the programme before it moves to the BBC Channel 4. Last year's final was the most watched programme of 2015, with 15 million people tuning in. The icing on the cake, if you like. Sorry. Andy Moore has the story.
Oh, good luck, guys.
A brief taste of what's being served up on tonight's programme.
I've dropped a bowl already.
It is the final. We've been waiting for this. And I think it's quite right we go royal. After all, it is the Queen's 90th birthday year.
After 7 series, this will be the final on the BBC.
It's just sweetness with a great sponge inside.
Paul Hollywood will be moving to Channel 4, but Mary Berry and presenters Mel and Sue will stay at the BBC.
No, I want to get off. I want to.
So will it be Andrew?
Hopefully it'll get better as I combine the layers. Fine, it's just going in.
Jane? Or the bookie's favourite, Candice?
I'm not worried, actually. I've been right at home.
One former finalist who now runs his own bakery says the show changed his life.
They're the figures that were on the top of mine, yeah.
And the most important ingredient in the programme?
It's always meant to be something that you can have a go at yourself. And I think that's the one thing they always keep an eye on. You know, you can watch it and then have a go and eat what they're making.
Some cakes made in celebration of tonight's show. There's no doubt the programme will take a huge slice of the audience. 15 million watched last year's final, making it the most watched programme of 2015. More than 11 million watched the opening episode of this series, and £75 million is the reported figure Channel 4 has paid for the show. Channel 4 is hoping to get its version of the Bake Off on air next year.
Bakers, you've got 5 minutes to get your plats out.
But contractual problems mean it could be delayed until 2018.
A pith helmet of bread. Just a door.
Andy Moore, BBC News.
Let's have a look at the weather. Jay Wynn is here, Jay.
Thanks, Simon. And things have changed in the last 24 hours, particularly the wind direction. We've gone from an easterly to more of a westerly. And don't forget, we've got this big area of high pressure across the south of the UK. The winds go clockwise around it, so we are dragging in the air from the middle of the Atlantic. That's a relatively mild air. That's going to filter its way across all parts of the UK, getting quite a long way north up towards the Shetland and beyond as you get on into the second part of the weekend. So daytime temperatures will be doing quite well in the next few days. But it was a slow start to the day today. Mist, fog and low cloud in the south of the UK. That's slowly lifting. Further north, patchy cloud and some spells of sunshine. And thanks to our weather watchers for sending in those pictures. Here's the satellite sequence, which confirms a fair bit of cloud across most parts of the UK. But you could also see there are some breaks in the cloud, a little bit of sunshine getting through. The good news is that underneath that cloud, there's very little rain to speak of, particularly so for England and Wales. Maybe a few spots in the south of Wales at the moment, and might see a spot or two through the Midlands, but generally speaking, a lot of fine and dry weather. There are some showers to be had across northern Scotland, and the western side also seeing a shower or two, but central and eastern areas largely dry and bright, and temperatures doing quite well. It's 13 or so degrees in Glasgow and Aberdeen. Maybe a degree or so more than that in Northern Ireland. A nice afternoon here. Might see a little bit of rain in northern England for a time this afternoon, but further south, if you catch any rain, count yourself very unlucky. There are some sunny spells to be had. It looks like a decent afternoon across Wales in particular. Temperature-wise, somewhere could get 17, maybe even 18 degrees, so very mild. And we keep that mild theme going overnight for most places. The eastern side of Scotland will turn chilly for a while, but with lighter winds in the south of the UK, once again, mist and fog is likely to be quite dense in places, so bear that in mind if you've got early travel plans. But most major town cities holding up quite nicely, 9, 10 or 11 degrees. Fog through the morning, dense in places, slow to clear, but it should do eventually. And then it looks like a fairly cloudy day once again across much of England and Wales. But again, very little rain to speak of. Might catch a little bit in these western coast and hills. Another mild day, that's for sure. 15, 16 degrees for Cardiff and for London. 13s and 14s for Glasgow and Belfast. Notice there is some rain to be had in the north of Scotland, where it's quite windy as well. That wetter, windier weather it's moving its way southwards overnight into Friday, but through these small hours of Friday morning, I suspect that weather front will start to edge its way back north again. So Northern Ireland will be quite damp on Friday. The western side of Scotland might see a little bit of rain, but for most of England and Wales, away from the northwest, it's a dry picture, but there's a lot of cloud once again, but it stays mild again. And into the weekends, it looks like it's going to be quite cloudy on both days. Still mild, but there's very little rain to speak of, so not such a bad weekend, I suspect.
Jay, thank you very much, Jay Wynn. A reminder of our main story this lunchtime. Despite resistance from some migrants, in the last few minutes, France says it has completed its mission to clear out the Calais camp, known as the Jungle. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. From me, good afternoon.